And hello, welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am your host, Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is the show all about? We bring you a forum, providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that so many people face. Things from systemic inequalities to pressing social problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives, as well as insights, helping us better understand and address these challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. In New York, immigrant and working class communities are the backbone of the city's vibrant culture and economy. Yet they face ongoing challenges from discrimination and poverty to the threats of deportation and family separation. One organization is dedicated to building their power through legal support, education, community organizing, and innovative policy advocacy. Joining us now is the Workplace Justice Lead Organizer at The Road, New York, or I should say at Make the Road, New York, Nisha Tabassum. That's why I make sure I got it correct. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, Nisha.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
And I got to ask you, in all this going on right now, we're hearing about ICE, deportations, things like that. What's happening on your end and what are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Make the Road is a really strong 28,000 member-led organization. We are at the forefront of serving the needs of our community that walk through our doors. They're facing multiple different kinds of threats and issues from abuses, discrimination, the fear of deportation. And so we are trying to do our part to make sure our community is equipped with their rights. We do a lot of Know Your Rights trainings. And then we also tackle on legal cases too and make sure we're providing that legal support to people who walk through our doors.
Yeah. And the basis for a lot of the legal work that you do is based simply around dignity and justice, right? To really get to a place a person deserves dignity and also justice. Unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah, when we say dignity and justice, there is no dignity when you're going to school and you fear getting kidnapped because of your immigration status. There is no dignity when you're contributing and empowering our economy, which is what immigrants do, right? They contribute to taxes, billions in taxes, yet they live in fear of getting detained or deported. There is no dignity there, and there is no freedom to stay and thrive. And so we are actively tackling that and trying to work with other advocates and our state leadership and legislature to push really smart policy solutions that would actually make it easier for people to thrive and live with dignity in New York.
Yeah. I know you ring the bell a lot about the discrimination and the injustice really done in the immigrant communities and the things that what kind of things can you give us an idea that you're seeing from your end in terms of ways that immigrants are being wrongly treated that violates, that dignity?
Yeah, so our legal team most recently has worked with Adrian Rojas. He is a Venezuelan TPS holder who was wrongfully detained and at threat of being deported to El Salvador. He was falsely accused of being affiliated with the Trinidad gang because of his tattoos, and he was taken from his family, from his home. And so Make the Roads, our legal team, have worked tirelessly to prove that he is a valid TPS holder and to reverse that deportation. So now he is reunited with his partner and son. And so we're seeing that across the board, right? We have a lot of members who are, following the news actively, and they're seeing what's coming down the pipeline from the Trump administration's deportation agenda. And they're coming to us with fears, and we're trying to do our part to provide that legal support. And then on the other end, also trying to provide advocacy at the state level. And one of the bills we're trying to really prioritize and push is the New York for All, which would extend sanctuary city safeguards and guardrails that we have currently in New York City to the rest of the state.
I think about community advocacy, right, and really rallying community to get behind this because there's so much that affects the immigrant community, but we know about allies, right, and the power of forming allies. How has this worked out for the organization in forming allies to really be, abreast of what's going on and at the same time also be a voice?
Yeah, thank you for that question. this is a push across the state. It's not just Make the Road. We're in coalition with so many other advocate groups, legal services. Most recently, Make the Road was part of the historic May Day March with the union, the labor union movement. And one of the central demands from the unions was to push for New York for All and to demand that the state legislature has much courage that immigrant New Yorkers do in showing up and passing this really critical legislation.
Mm-hmm. As I look around, I see so much that's going on by way of, television, right? We're right in the business too, so don't judge us. But there's so much that you can watch on television, so much that you can watch on social media when it talks about the issues and the things that we're talking about here that particularly, deal with social justice. How do you view the work that you do from a social justice lens?
I mean, everything we do is related to advocating for our communities, right? They are Black, brown, immigrant, working class New Yorkers who face so many different inequities and injustices. And that's what social justice is, a spectrum. And we're working across that spectrum. We work on housing issues. We work on trans rights, right? Immigrants, trans people are more at risk of multiple different threats because of their identities. We work on worker issues, right? We try to hold employers, unscrupulous employers, accountable when they discriminate or when they steal the employees' wages. So we're at the forefront of all these issues. Because we are directly addressing the people who walk through our doors, their needs, we are seeing the inequities up front. And so as a result, what we also do is we release a city and state platform on an annual basis, which really highlights a lot of smart policy solutions that deals with some of the issues that they're facing.
For yourself, obviously, one of the most important, features of the New York for All Act. I want to talk about that for a minute, right? And what are some of the most important features that you see in this New York for All Act? And let's back out first of all. Let me ask that you explain to viewers a little bit about the New York for All Act. How does that come into play?
Yeah. So the New York for All Act would prevent using local resources to further Trump's immigration agenda. It would actually prevent collaboration with ICE from local and municipal offices and officials. It would prevent sharing sensitive information with ICE. And it would also require that, in order to enter any private areas, they will need a judicial warrant. So it would actually strengthen a lot of the protections we have in New York City across the state. Most recently, Mayor Adams has invited ICE into Rikers Island, and there was a lawsuit that was filed by the New York City Council, right, to be able to push back against that. And so that's an example of really, really strong policies we see in New York City, and it's time that we extend that to the rest of the state, where, in other parts of the state, you have local police who are deputized to act like ICE and detain people simply for existing, right?
And when we talk about Rikers Island, obviously that's pretty deep to find that you're seeing ICE on Rikers Island. We know the Rikers Island is just that. It's an island for, inmates. So to go all the way to Rikers Island to pull people, you have a lot of people saying, yes, this breaks all, laws and policies. No, I should say policies, but the policies that are in place right now are set to break these laws.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can you clarify a little bit
So
more?
when you say the policies that are there, right? They're they're definitely breaking these laws that have been enacted by the Trump administration. We know that there's a lot of pushback, people going back to court just to really speak against this. So when you talk about that, this is where your work comes in, right?
Yeah.
So this is where your work comes in when somebody's rights have been violated.
Yeah, there is a lot of violation. The people are afforded undue process, and one of the things Make the Road does do is also we join lawsuits that set precedents on improving the trajectory for immigrants, right, and in decreasing some of the attacks on immigrants' rights. One recent example is of ICE being able to get information from IRS on ITIN holders, right? Actually acknowledging that immigrants directly pay taxes, right, to our economy. And Make the Road did join a lawsuit against that, and I think it's still pending. But that's just one example of some of the work that we do.
Yeah, can you give us some more in terms of the advocacy and things that maybe people should be paying attention to there are legislative items that maybe people can lend their voice to.
Yeah. There's the New York for All. Obviously, that's one of the really biggest priorities right now at our organization, along with like so many other advocates. We are also pushing dignity, not detention. So this would end the shameful collaboration with ICE and detention centers that New York is in the business in doing. It would amend, I believe, our correction laws to prevent the continuation, renewal, or entering of ICE immigration detention centers in New York State. That's another one. I can pivot a little bit to more of the worker stuff that we're trying to push at the state level. In New York State, the budget had just passed.
Yeah.
I actually do want to mention we were really successful in securing the Housing Access Voucher Program. This has been a fight for a very long time. We got $50 million in the budget for the next 4 years. That'll be renewed to provide housing vouchers to people at risk of homelessness or who are actually like families who are homeless and to be able to get them into permanent housing. Just pivoting a little bit to the worker stuff. We've been trying to push the Empire Worker Enforcement Act for a while now, and this would actually, in light of the attacks we see from the federal government on dismantling the NLRB, dismantling the Federal Department of Labor, this legislation would empower the DOL with resources to go after unscrupulous employers who are subject their employees to wage theft, other kinds of discrimination. And if we enact this legislation, and we are closer than ever, we have a majority in both houses, it would give people the ability to bring lawsuits as plaintiffs anonymously against their employers. And if they win, they'll get part of the settlement, and part of the settlement will go to the DOL to actually go after some of these really bad employers.
Yeah. And how often are you getting complaints on this?
I mean, our workplace justice legal team and our organizers are constantly, battling issues of wage theft. We've won a lot of wage theft cases, and I believe that's something also like New York City, the comptroller was also prioritizing in going after employers.
Also, I want to talk about past the New York heat, because that's important too, right?
Yeah.
And this bill talks about gas utility regulation with climate leadership and Community Protection Act. So, and the goals that have been set forth there. For somebody who may not be so familiar, walk us through.
Yeah, so the New York Heat Act is really meant to alleviate energy burdened households, which are majority Black, brown, and working class New Yorkers, who face a disproportionate burden of energy and utility bills. And so the whole purpose of the act is to not only transition to renewable and clean energy, but end ratepayer subsidies to build out gas infrastructure. And so the goal would be to prevent that from happening and lower utility costs as a result.
I'm looking here and I'm thinking about, the fact of how we're getting ready to brace for the summer, right? And, when you summer utility costs go, sky high and stuff like that. I can imagine that the number of calls that you're getting in regards to complaints and things of that nature continue to skyrocket during that time. For somebody who's out there right now saying, listen, I have these challenges, and you're a resource that's available. Talk to them about the process and how they can possibly get their voice heard or join in on,
So, one of the things I want to highlight is Make the Road. Not only, do our community members come through our doors for essential services and needs and issues that they face, we also try to, we encourage them to become members, and we also really engage in intentional political education with our members to talk about the systemic issues that they're facing, connecting it to the root causes, and then getting involved in advocacy to actually create a world where they can thrive, right? They have the freedom to thrive and not have to deal with this. And so our members are actively involved in all of our campaigns. They go up to Albany, they're in meetings with legislators, sharing their stories. They're pushing a lot of our other community members to get involved and fight, and that's what we're seeing at our organization.
For somebody who may want more information, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, just come to our website, maketheroadnewyork.org. We also have a deportation defense manual with a lot of Know Your Rights information, both in English and Spanish, at weprotectusny.org. So feel free to check out that resource. And then social media, Make the Road New York. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky.
Yeah. Well, certainly I want to thank you for coming by and sharing and really, having the opportunity to discuss a lot of things that really are affecting. Your organization does some great work.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really nice to be here.
No, great. And I want to ask you also before you go, as far as the organization is concerned, people, being connected and stuff like that, somebody may say, what's the prerequisites in terms of being, bringing stuff to the...
There's no prerequisite, just come through our door. And everyone is welcome regardless of your background.
That's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
All righty, well, I want to let you know we are taking a quick break, but guess what? We got more coming up right after this. And welcome back. Soaring incarceration rates fail to make communities safer, deepening racial and economic inequalities and breaking apart families and draining public resources. Secretive gang databases disproportionately target Black and Latino residents, increasing surveillance and violating civil rights without reducing crime. Community-driven alternatives and policy reforms offer more promise in cutting violence and rebuilding trust. Joining me now, we've got the Managing Director of Policy at the Bronx Defenders, Brittany A. McCoy, and thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
And continuing on this conversation, because as we look and we see, the numbers don't seem to be getting any better, do they?
No, they don't seem to be getting any better. And we see this over-incarceration of Black and brown people, specifically in the Bronx, New York, not having, it's a very deep emotional toll that people are feeling when they're seeing this over-incarceration and seeing people being taken away from their homes from a system that continues to target us by a zip code, by how we look, by the neighborhoods that we come from, by the friends that we have, and it's not contributing to the overall goal that the NYPD says that they have, which is public safety.
Yeah. When we hear about high incarceration, we hear about these numbers. I mean, the first thing that people think about is, first of all, the injustice, right? And that's the injustices done to the individual. We're not talking about people who've committed the crimes. We're talking about these bogus arrests and things that continue to happen. However, when we look at the numbers and the statistics the way that they are, there's a heavy impact that happens in inner city communities across America.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of a breakdown about what this incarceration does for communities, particularly the inner city.
Yeah, so, this is racial profiling, right? Just to call it what it is.
Right.
And when you have this racial profiling and the way in which it impacts our communities, it doesn't just take a toll on the person itself, it takes a toll on the entire community. So when you have somebody who's taken away from their family by the system, right? You may have a child who is losing a parent overnight. You may have a caregiver, a parent who has to become a single caregiver overnight. You'll have grandparents or family members who have to step in and help, You may have a community who will lose like a neighborhood basketball coach or a mentor to people who are on the block. And it's a deep emotional toll that people are feeling day in and day out. That's on a micro level. When you look at it on a macro level, you see the systemic oppression and how it's impacting our community overall. When people are arrested, it can impact every part of their lives, right? You have millions of people who may lose their voting rights. You have millions of people who may lose the right to be able to serve on a jury trial. You have millions of people who will lose access to better jobs, better housing. You see this every day, day in and day out in the work that we do. So it has this micro level and macro level impact on communities specifically that look like ours in the Bronx.
What are we seeing by way of retaliation and response, right? Because communities are speaking out against over-policing, communities are speaking out against the mass incarceration. How are communities fighting back?
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's always going to be some sort of retaliation when you're fighting against a system that wasn't designed for us, right? It wasn't built for us to succeed in the first place. But we have people who are really raising their voices, making sure that we say that this is wrong, right? That's the first step. This is not okay. This shouldn't happen in our communities. We have legislation that's currently on the table. The wonderful council member, Althea Stevens, she is sponsoring a bill right now in City Council. It's called Intro 798. And this is to make sure that there will be an abolishment of the gang database as it stands right now. And the NYPD has this database that they use that really impacts communities of color like ours. It's 99% filled with Black and brown people, right? And it's utilized to racially profile as this high tech tool that is masked and as if it is a tool of public safety when it really is just cloaked in racial profiling, like a stop and frisk almost 2.0, right? And that's how people are speaking up and speaking out through legislation, through advocating, through going to their city council members or state assembly members and saying this is not okay. It's not okay for public safety to be masked in this way that is going to target and over-police our communities in a way that it's happened for decades. This is not new.
Right. And you also talk about making sure there's transparency when it comes to these police databases.
Yeah.
For someone who may not be so familiar, break down what the police databases are and why you're calling for transparency. Yeah,
so it really actually isn't clear how one gets on the database, right? We've heard instances where people are on the database who are as young as 13 years old, and you can be entered on the database for wishing someone a happy birthday on social media, for living in a certain public housing complex, for living on a certain block, for wearing a certain color, right? And it's this criminalization of being in a gang. And to be very clear, being in a gang is not a crime, right? People have their opinions on what being in a gang may look like, but it is not a crime on its face. And this database is not transparent because people don't know if they're on it or not, but it is used against them if they are ever arrested, if they are ever in front of a judge. It can be used against them when they're being up for bail. It can be used against them in many different instances. So there's no transparency on even how someone is even able to get off of this database when they do find out they're on it, right? So there's just this lack of transparency of what this even means, but the NYPD is using this as a tool to say that they need it to be able to protect our communities. And we don't understand how it's protection when there's no transparency. It's really driving a wedge.
So conceivably, I can end up on a database tomorrow without any notice? Or
no notice.
Right.
No notice. You can end up on a database for the neighborhood that you live in. You can end up on a database for knowing a particular group of people. You may even end up on a database for throwing up a particular sign that may be like, you know, I'm in a sorority, so like we have a particular symbol that we throw at them. I'm not saying that would end up on a database, but it could actually.
Yeah, and that's worrisome all in itself.
Yes.
So, as we talk about this here, obviously your work continues, right?
Yes.
What's at the forefront of the work that you're doing right now?
I would say, you know, we're a holistic office, so we really are looking at everything and how it impacts the people that we care about every day in the Bronx community. I would definitely say the work that we're doing right now, we're discussing in regards to making sure that Black and brown people in the Bronx aren't being over-criminalized, aren't being over-policed, and we rarely care about access to resources, making sure that people have the things that they need to make sure that public safety, when we talk about public safety, that's investment in housing, right? That's investment in jobs. That's investment in our young people who make sure this city runs. That's our future. So that's the work that we're really focusing on right now in a legislative aspect and a community aspect as well.
Yeah, and I mean, but there's so much out there right now, right?
Yeah.
And in this election season, has it been a little bit harder to get the get the ball across the finish line?
I mean, I think every season has its challenges, to be completely honest, right? We're under a new federal administration that does make it very difficult to do the work that we do. We have an administration that doesn't believe in the fact that there is racial profiling, that doesn't believe in the fact that Black and brown communities are being over-policed or over-criminalized. We have an administration that doesn't believe in abiding by the law, period, right? And we're a legal organization and we believe in abiding by the law and creating laws where they are complicated and complex to make sure that they are speaking to the needs of the community first. So every season has its challenges, but we continue to move forward and push forward for the things that we believe in, because even if it doesn't get across the field this year, there's always next year.
Right. As we look at ICE, we see a lot of work that's being done, ripping people away from their families, right? Children being ripped away from their families. There is a parallel, because when you look and see what goes on with the mass incarceration of Black and brown people, children are literally, in another type of way, being ripped apart from their families. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, and this is the beautiful part of our work at the Bronx Defenders. There's always this interconnected nature in the things that we do. Even when we talk about the over-incarceration of Black and brown people, when we're talking about mass incarceration, the Office of Family and Children's Services actually did a study, and they found that there are 100,000 children in New York City that have at least one person in jail or prison. Over 100,000 children. So when we talk about the impact of tearing people apart away from their families, it's a devastating impact, and it makes a devastating toll on the communities that we say that we serve. So when we look at it in the criminal legal system, when we look at it in immigration, what we're seeing is this intentional dismantling of the family structure in our communities, and the law is being weaponized as the way to say that our family structures do not matter, and the over-incarceration actually matters more.
Yeah. Where do we go from here?
We keep advocating. We keep fighting. There's always another season. There's always another day. I always tell people, to make sure they're raising their voices. We're really pushing for, the passing of this bill that that City Council member Althea Stevens is pushing for, because this is really going to be a step forward in the right direction. On the community aspect of things, the Bronx Defenders, we do host a lot of community events. Our community engagement and community organizing team, they do great work. And that's a great part of our organization. People sometimes see us as the legal organization, and they may not think about us in the factor of the community work that we do or the policy work that we do. But our community organizing and engagement team, they have a center that's called The Block, which is the Bronx Leadership and Organizing Center. And they're holding a Youth Justice Summit next week, I believe, on May 28th, which is for young people, speaking about the cradle to prison pipeline. We believe young people are the backbone of society. They are who are going to take us from this place to another place, and that will be an opportunity for young people to get involved as well.
I think about one of the things that you do, and that's really building bridges, right?
Yeah.
And that bridge between police and community.
Yeah.
It's a big bridge that needs to be built. And I mean, I've been sitting behind this desk for, right? And that's a conversation that's always had. However, when I think about it, there has to be that bridge built if there's ever going to be trust, right? So how are you working on that, and what are you seeing in that area? Because if we're talking about police-community relations, this is very necessary.
Yeah, I think that's difficult, because when you have a system and we have an NYPD that uses databases and other tactics the way in which they do, and we speak out and we say we want transparency, we want our lives to be valued, right? It shouldn't be based off of a zip code or an area that we come from, that there is this there's this assumption that we are less than, or we deserve to be surveilled, or we deserve for our constitutional rights to be stripped. So I really turn that question really on to the people who are doing the things to our community, because I think that in order to rebuild trust, if there is going to be a rebuilding of it, it should come from the people who are doing the damage. It shouldn't be on the people who are being harmed to have to take the lead on that.
Yeah. What things should people be taking notice at when it comes to this police-community relationship? Because I think that so many times we are quick to jump on one side or the other here. But what should people really be paying attention to if we're going to build effective bridges?
Yeah, I think we have to focus on the fact, right? And the
Right.
facts are that there's harm being done, right? That's foundationally. There's harm being done. If we are going to move forward in a way that says that we value the lives of everyone, then we have to remove tactics and practices and not cloak them in this public safety narrative that there has to be a stripping of the things that we desire or care about for people to be safe, right? So that has to happen first. There has to be an overall acknowledgement. It's like when someone harms you, right? In order to be able to move forward, you have to first acknowledge the thing that happened. And right now, it doesn't feel like there's any acknowledgement of the thing that's happening. And when people speak out, we want to make sure that they feel empowered to do so and that their voices are going to be heard.
Yeah. Voices being heard are very, very critical. Incarceration.
Yes.
Right. I know you'd spend a lot of time in
Yes.
that area, right?
Yeah.
And really, when we think about incarceration, these numbers that continue to rise. We're seeing more of our brothers and sisters still behind bars, but yet and still for those families that are being affected, what support is out there for those persons? Because for some families, it's their first time dealing with this incarceration situation, right? In other situations, maybe they have somebody that's being consistently incarcerated. But there's often that saying that, listen, when a person is incarcerated, that person's not just incarcerated by themselves.
Yeah.
Their family's incarcerated, their community's incarcerated. So with the work that you do, talk to us about how families are supported even in incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really work on is building community. You talked about building those bridges. We want to make sure that people are reaching out to their, representatives, their state assembly members, their city council members to see what resources are available within their own specific communities and districts. When we talk about the advocacy level and what people can do to talk about their experiences, what the system wants us to sometimes feel like is that we're in a silo, right? And what community does is it allows us a place to be able to raise our voices and say, hey, this is happening to me. How did you deal with it? What was a resource that you utilized? If you have a child who may be going through a really traumatic situation because they lost, a brother, or they lost a father, or they lost a mother or a family member by being incarcerated or being in the system, does this child need therapy, right? Does this child need an after-school program to be able to go and, release whatever stress they may be dealing with? So we really want to encourage people to build in community because the silos is what makes us feel so isolated by the system.
Yeah, I think about so many families that are really impacted by this in such a traumatic way.
Yeah.
With so many people being incarcerated, it has to make your job a whole lot more. Talk to me about this, and I'm not trying to be political, but I am going to make the statement. Since this last presidential election, how much more has come through your door?
I mean, we had a lot more come through our door. I'm from the Bronx, born and raised, so, all of these issues are deeply personal to me. I've had family members who have been impacted by the system. I have friends who have been impacted by the system on micro and macro levels. And what we've seen at the Bronx Defenders over the time that this new administration has been in place, specifically in the immigration sector, we've been doing a host of Know Your Rights trainings because we have people who are fearful of their lives, right? We hear stories of parents who are fearful of sending their children to school because they're afraid that they'll be kidnapped, literally kidnapped. From them. They're afraid of seeking out medical services because they're unsure if they go to the doctor, if their addresses or names are going to be shared in a way that would be harmful to their community. So what we're dealing with a lot of is the fear that is happening, right? Because people are very scared. They're unsure if they're going to be able to come back to their homes at night. And that's not a fun place to be in, especially when you give so much to this community. There's this narrative that, the immigration population just takes away from this community. And that's not what it means to be New York City. That's not what it means to be a New Yorker. I went to college in Virginia, right? We always hear about New York City being this melting pot. And if we're going to be a melting pot, we're a melting pot for all people, right? And we don't get to just say, people are not extracting, right? And so we want to make sure that we're protecting, and we want to make sure that people feel safe to go home at night.
Yeah, pretty great conversation. Continue the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And certainly we got to have you back again so we
Of
can talk more.
course.
All righty?
Yes, thank you.
Much needed. All right. Listen, everybody, taking a quick break. Guess what? We got more coming up right after this.
We're gonna start the show right now. This is my favorite part. Ready in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hey, this is Angel, and I am one of the instructors for the in-studio production. Here at BronxNet, we offer classes that can help you elevate, expand, and start your television career. All you have to do is sign up at BronxNet.org/education. For the past 7 years, I have been in various productions, spanning from talk shows, independent films, news reports, art displays, teachings, musical performances, and many more. Ain't that right, Angel? Yeah, you're absolutely right, Angel. There are a lot of creative individuals that we're just waiting to sign up for the class. And if I may, can I also express thank you, Angel. That's all the time we have left. Visit BronxNet.org/education and become a producer by taking the course. The class I offer is also in English, en español y también bilingüe. Nos vemos en la próxima clase.
And welcome back. Recent shifts in federal labor and immigration policies are stirring a national debate and creating ripple effects in communities across the country. From labor shortages in key industries to legal battles over union rights, the economic and human impact of these decisions are being felt on factory floors, small businesses, and even in the halls of the Vatican. Joining me now is the founding partner of the Boyd Law Group, Patrick Boyd. And Patrick, good to have you as always, and looking forward to this conversation, my brother.
Always a pleasure, Daren. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. In my last segment, we were talking a little bit about mass incarceration, right? And mass incarceration and then also mass deportation. From what we're hearing and from what we're seeing, give me your impact that you're seeing by results of these mass deportations.
Yeah, it's an important question to focus on and to consider. I mean, I think probably the most important thing to think about is the impact on small businesses, Daren. The stats indicate that about a third of small business employees are immigrants, and about half of small businesses in New York and Connecticut are run by immigrants. So that's a huge swath of the workforce where immigration issues are relevant and of concern. The administration has been unabashed in their protocols and desire to find undocumented workers, to punish them, to deport them, and frankly, to also punish and find those employers who might be employing those workers. It's had a great impact on the security of the small businesses. For our office, what we're getting a lot of is calls from small businesses who get notices from the government with the intention of the government auditing their payroll and reviewing their workforce again, which scares them, costs them money because they have to call us to help with it, and destabilizes the workplace overall for just a ton of small businesses, which are a big part of the economy here in the tri-state area.
Yeah. You know, I'm looking at some notes here, and immigrants accounted for approximately a third of jobs in 2023 in New York and Connecticut. Seeing similar numbers. These numbers are pretty huge. When we talk about these incarcerations and deportations, business and the way that crunch is happening right now, I can be honest, I remember I was sitting at a restaurant not too long ago, and there was a gentleman who was there, and he was upset. He was an owner. He says, a business owner. He says, I don't know what to do because a quarter of my force got taken by ICE today. And
Right.
so I'm stuck. This is a story that we hear constantly across the tri-state area, but is it in the end, the average person possibly could be the one that's going to bear the brunt of it with higher costs and more delays.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And to your point, with that particular restaurateur, I suppose he knew what was happening. A fair amount of our small business owners are showing up to work, and they just don't have the workers that they expected. They don't know why the workers aren't there. The workers sometimes don't even know whether they're adequately or supposed to be fearful, but they don't want to get in trouble, so they don't show up. And so all of a sudden, you might have 3 or 4 less people in the workplace. another social tie-in that I think is sometimes missed is that oftentimes there are very valuable social services being offered by people who are immigrants. So perhaps you have an elderly parent that's being cared for or looked after by a person who's a recent immigrant, or perhaps your children are being cared for after school by somebody like that who may all of a sudden not show up, not because they don't want to do their jobs, not because they're good people, but because they're scared and they don't understand what's happening with the law. And I think that's one of the extra concerns here is not just that the initiative is being presented so aggressively, but that there's not adequate education about its impact. So people, when in doubt, they worry.
I think you made a very good point when we talked about this whole thing with small businesses being impacted and how the immigration issue is really affecting small businesses. I do want to say that thinking again, you got two challenges, right? Here's one challenge. One challenge is I lose my workforce because of deportation and ICE, but then I also lose my workforce because of fear. Because as you have people who are saying, listen, I haven't been deported yet, but Lord knows I don't want to go out. I don't want to come out of the house because I don't want to get caught up in it. And this is what a lot of people are. This is what a lot of people are dealing with.
That's right. And or maybe it's not them, right? Maybe it's just their husband or their wife or their spouse or their neighbors or somebody they share a house with. They just don't know. Immigration law is terribly intricate, terribly complicated. They're not certain about their status. They're still waiting on approval for this or that. But the fear winds up motivating them to not show up for work, to not help. And if that means we're losing 1/3 potentially of the workers that we rely on in this state, or even in the tri-state area, perhaps, that's a meaningful drag on an economy that we're already worried about.
Yeah. Let me shift gears a little bit, talk about the president in another area, which is the anti-union executive orders. And if you could bring us up to speed as to where we are with the executive order and what the potential is there.
Sure. So on March 27th, an executive order was issued by the President of the United States, ultimately phrased as the executive branch seeking more untethered freedom to regulate sort of security-based agencies, and also to enhance the executive branch's control over operational efficiency. And this is consistent, of course, with the president's platform. He was going to cut government, look into government, create or cut inefficiencies. But this has been a very, very aggressive push towards that. The executive order is ultimately designed to allow the president to avoid negotiating over terms and conditions of employment, meaning that he can let people go faster with less time to abide by their collective bargaining agreements in doing so. Workers have collective bargaining agreements for how they're paid, when they're paid, what their schedule is, whether they can be let go and for what reasons. The president is saying in this executive order, well, I want to be efficient about this, so I want to be able to avoid or give less regard to those collectively bargained for rights of workers, meaning I can lay them off faster, I can cut government jobs more quickly, and I can be more efficient about it. And again, this is leading to that concern and that fear that we're talking about. Partially, workers are being impacted, and partially, workers are scared about whether they will be impacted. The president's executive order will impact things like the Department of State, the Department of Treasury, the Department of Defense, the Department of Veterans Affairs. That most of the news reporting says it's potentially about 1 million organized workers being impacted. And there have been several court challenges to the president's authority to do this, but the law isn't precisely clear. And a lot of the courts have to wait to see what he does before they can enjoin him from doing it. Yeah. So there was a recent ruling in May from an appellate court in D.C. that says, for now, he can go ahead and start cutting, start changing, start making more efficient, in his version of the way to describe it, these agencies.
And from your perspective, I mean, the president says the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 does give him some authority there to be able to do what he's doing. as a legal person, you're the man. I'm leaning on you. Does he have a point here?
Well, I mean, I think probably one of the most important informative observations is the one you just made. We're talking about something that was a law or a piece of legislation from 1978, and he's taking an approach so novel that we're considering it now in 2025, right? So it's roughly looking to change and redefine a law that's almost 50 years old. I think the president, if you were to look on a scope of analysis, the president's authority is far more strong when it comes to regulating things like national security, right? So potentially the FBI, potentially the Department of Defense, right? The Department of State. When he starts to get into the Department of Treasury, the Department of Energy and Health and Human Services, and some of those other departments, I think he's on thinner ice. I think everybody would agree with that analysis, and I think you have to look at it from two perspectives. One, he's looking at something very differently than people have been looking at it for 50 years to start with, which is very destabilizing. But then two, if you want to analyze the scope of his authority from a legal perspective, the more his efforts are tied into national security, the greater his powers, the more they're tied into social services, veterans affairs, health and human services, the weaker his arguments probably are.
Yeah. So how do we see this playing out?
I think that the president is likely to lose more than he wins in this, as he has in many of his endeavors. But two things happen. One, he wins in some places, and two, and we've sort of talked about this already, the efforts inspire fear that leads to a social impact, even if the legal impact isn't that significant. In other words, are we going to lose valuable people from state, Department of Defense, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Treasury because their jobs are less secure, or they're worried that their jobs are less secure? Yes, for sure, even if the president loses on the law. Are we going to have people stop helping parents, stop serving in restaurants, stop coming to work because they're scared, even if their immigration status is secure? Yes, the fear is still going to have a motivation. So I guess that's probably the best way to put it. I think he's going to win some legal battles, probably lose more, but I think the fear is going to lead to a greater efficiency in what he's doing. And that may mean that it's ultimately a successful set of initiatives.
Yeah. Let's hop on a plane for a minute, go across the Atlantic, head out there towards Italy. We do have a new elected Pope, Pope Leo XIV. We do know some things, that he is a Chicago White Sox fan and not a Chicago Cubs fan. We want to make that very clear. He wants to make that very clear. We know that he's the first American-born Pope, and we also know that he's also, prior to that as a cardinal, spoken out on some of the injustices that have occurred by way of workplace. Talk to me now about this new Pope and Pope Leo the 14th, and as whether or not we've actually heard him say anything when it comes to, since his papacy has begun, anything with workers' rights.
Sure. So yes, our first American-born Pope, born in Chicago, educated in Chicago and at Villanova in Pennsylvania. Probably one of the more important indications of what he's going to do is the name he's chosen. There were earlier Pope Leos, all dedicated in a meaningful way to the advocacy for workers' rights. A professor I worked for a long time ago used to write about the papal encyclicals, which are sort of the Vatican's positions on workers' rights, dignity, and the morality of important workers' opportunities. Probably the most important thing that this Pope has spoken on, and this is not since he ascended to Pope, but as a cardinal, is the importance of workers' rights, dignity, opportunities, and the preservation of those rights, dignities, and opportunities in light of new workplace efficiencies, AI now being that, but the church weighed in very heavily on workers' rights back at the times of the Industrial Revolution, and he's referred often to the importance of finding dignity and strength and opportunity in work for people when there are technological changes. So I think we can count on him for that. Perhaps a useful opportunity also, just in the sense that for the church to choose an American is for the church to perhaps choose to recognize the U.S. as a leader. As an interesting counterbalance to some of the things we've been talking about, the U.S. has come a long way in ways that we've talked about recently on your show, in adding for workers' rights, more sick leave, more paternity leave, more maternity leave, more opportunities for worker success, more diversity and inclusion in the workforce. And hopefully we can turn an ear towards the Pope as he talks about how the U.S. has led and can continue to lead the country and the world, as other religious leaders do.
Yeah. I mean, as we're moving now into this 2025 year, I want to think about for a moment and let you give me your thought about the voice of the Pope. We know back in the day, the Pope spoke, it was quite powerful. Catholics definitely, but the world embraced what the Pope had to say. Given the the political landscape of what's going on here, with him being an American, with him also, coming from where he's come from, how do you sense his voice weighing out when it comes to issues like workers' rights and human rights? And I guess my question would be more of the listening ear. How much of a listening ear do you think that he's going to get from people across America and in the world?
Well, as in America, I think the church believes, and I do, that he's going to speak to Americans in a uniquely significant way. As a man who spent a great deal of time traveling and a great deal of time in Peru, if I recall correctly, I think he's also going to have a good finger on the pulse of world leadership and understanding how privileged we are here in this country in comparison to how many places can take what we've done and what we've accomplished as a guidepost for what they can hope to do. I mean, frankly speaking, I think the church also needs to and wants to re-engage the American and the U.S. In order to raise money to try to help in furtherance of the advancement of people, both in the U.S. and abroad, with a lot of social missions. So I guess I can only say that it's meaningful right now to have a U.S.-born Pope. I think it's a very big signal from the church, and I think it's likely, if the church has what they want, to change the amount of weight the Pope's voice has in the States and as a voice for social justice in a time where we desperately need some balance, some perspective, some global insights as to how lucky we are and how much of an obligation our luck has on how we continue to operate here and influence the way other people will perhaps look at us as leaders.
Yeah. With this political administration, and not just mentioning the Pope, but literally the President of the United States and all that's come on with the amount of executive orders, what are we seeing by way of court costs? Because I am sure that this is a number that we're not even going to, that gets not even enough coverage, if you will. Because has to be an astronomical amount of court fees and costs, given the fact of all these decisions that have come down.
Yeah, well, I would have to agree. It's been a tumultuous time in the economy with the market. It's been a tumultuous time in the labor markets, and it's been a tumultuous time in the courts as a result. Is the government spending time, effort, and money in court? Yes. Are small businesses going to be spending time and money in court? Yes. Is all of that going to cause a drain on resources that might otherwise be used for more efficient and productive things? Yes, I think without question. And maybe that's the best way to answer your question. I think the overarching sentiment I have as a person who works with the workforce and people involved in labor, it is partially the litigation itself, but it is mostly the uncertainty as to all the things that are being litigated that is likely to slow things down, make things inefficient, and probably cause a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of destabilized families also.
Yeah. Things that we should be paying attention to before we go?
I guess the only thing I would say is that for the most part, I have found the court decisions to be tempered And I think the Supreme Court has spent a lot of good, thoughtful time in mulling over their decisions and work. So as much as people are alarmed by what they're hearing and seeing, I would encourage them to spend the time to lean in and read the decisions of the judges who take their jobs very seriously and who are, on balance, very successful legal minds who chose to take less money to sit on the bench and are very talented. I think we can have a lot of faith in each other and in our court system.
Yeah. And I know with the passing of the New York State budget here now, a lot of people have been talking about that we may be seeing some more litigation as well. There's a lot of things that are just happening politically that leads to the court system. But then again, that gives you and I an opportunity to really chat it up a lot.
Plenty to talk about. It's been a miraculously bumpy 100 days. I suspect it'll be a miraculously bumping 4 years. And it's always a great opportunity to talk with you, hear your other guests, and to hear you and the questions you have and the observations you have. So thank you for having me on again.
No, thank you. I really appreciate having you here. And I don't know how much time we have. I just want to double check before I get this one more question in here at least. Okay, good. They're telling me I got 1 second left. But as far 1 minute left before I get out of here. So let me get this here into you real quickly. As we look towards 2025, obviously these worker rights are going to be coming to the forefront. Are we looking for any big landmark decision real quickly that's going to say, hey, and the immigration thing as far as immigrant workers, anything big that we can look to and say, hey, pay attention to this. If this happens, this turns this left?
I suspect that the administration is going to continue to lose more than they win. And what I don't know is whether or not that's going to change the political wherewithal of the administration, or whether they believe that destabilizing things by fighting is nevertheless worth it because of the destabilization and sort of the fear or the urging in a particular direction that comes with it. So if I were to be thinking about what I expect to see next, it's really just I'm going to be observing whether or not if there are a cascade of losses or half wins for the administration, whether or not they're going to lose momentum and have potentially less support or not, and how that's going to influence what they do next. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. A lot to pay attention to. Patrick, thanks a lot. You always make it make sense, is what we say around the way. So thanks a lot for making it make sense.
Always a pleasure.
All right, Patrick Boyd, founding partner of the Boyd Law Group. Thanking him for joining us. We come to the end of our show today. Hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum. If you're rewatching this week's edition, catch Free Cablecast right here on BronxNet.org. Want to join the conversation, present your point of view? Guess what? Visit us on social media at BronxNet TV. We'll be back next week, continuing to elevate the discussion and bring you further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care. God bless.